All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's not Saturday, it's not Tuesday, but it's Thursday. And we're here for another episode of the MSP Initiative. Today we have Corey. And if you haven't watched, your various news channels or, your late night television and seen the PC Matic commercials, I have. This is who we have on today. Corey from PC Matic. Corey, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, George. I appreciate you having us. My name is Corey Munson. I'm Vice President of Sales at PC Matic. Been with the company for 15 years now. The company itself has been around for 20 years. We've got 50 employees. We've always been a virtual work from home company, so we don't even break stride in times like this. We just go full steam ahead. But great to be here.
I didn't even realize you guys were around for that long. I mean, I feel like PC Matic, not to get, too deep here, but I feel like PC Matic was more residential, like consumer based for a minute and then kind of pivoted to commercial, or do I have that math wrong?
You're definitely right. It's a common misconception about where we're at as a company now. To give you some of the backstory, and some of the old timers listening in might appreciate this. The company was founded by a gentleman who was formerly a senior vice president at Gateway. So if anybody listening in, maybe their first PC was delivered in a cow-spotted Holstein box once upon a time, he ran sales, marketing, and support at Gateway when it was at its peak. And I was part of his organization there. Many of our original employees that worked for us worked for him there. So we definitely were founded and started with that kind of consumer feel and consumer focus. But it's been maybe the last 5 or 6 years we shifted into the channel, launched a B2B product, and we do all of that business direct. So we do a ton of business with our MSP and MSSP partners right now.
Understand. Well, that's very interesting. Corey, where are you based physically, out of curiosity?
I'm actually in Iowa. So we've got a nucleus of employees that were tied to Gateway, which was a big Midwestern company. That are still in the Midwest, but we've got folks scattered all across the country. Big pocket of people down in Myrtle Beach. That's where our CEO is. So we've got a lot of developers and some support people that are down there around him.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, Iowa, lots of corn these days. I'm just kidding.
Lots of corn. It's getting tall, and even a pandemic can't stop the corn from growing around here. So things are good.
100%. So, let's today's topic, right? I mean, we've been, really, since March, twice a week, we've pulled different people in from the various parts of the channel community here. And, obviously work from home has been, pretty reoccurring theme. One may even say, talked about so much, there's nothing left to talk about. I'm not sure. There's, obviously a lot of gut feelings, a lot of speculation, a lot of guessing. And so today, it sounds like we have a little bit of the opposite, right? We actually have some math. So I'm curious to hear, what you guys have put together. And I'd love to understand, how we take that information and make it useful.
I appreciate that opportunity because it's a conversation we've really been trying to facilitate and drive, because we think the end result is these are opportunities for our MSP partners out there. If we can get our hands around this and really understand how to best approach this collectively, that's vendors, that's MSP partners, I think there is an opportunity there. And what really set the stage for us trying to figure this out from a numbers standpoint was, we had a conversation with Jay McBain from Forrester last week, where Jay talked about how we really moved past this triage phase of moving everybody to home, and MSPs were on the front line of making that happen, and they've enhanced the brand itself by making it happen. But now we're in a new stage of, I'm going to call it the coming to grips with the reality that maybe somewhere between 30 and 40% of those that have moved to work from home are never going to go back to the office.
Wow.
And
where did that number really come from? Was that,
I've seen it. I've seen a number that was as high as 60 to 70%. Now you start to get there and you start to wonder just how accurate that is. But in bouncing that 30% off of Jay, he seemed to agree that that's where this is probably going to be. And if that's the case, and then if we step back and look what happened in the wake of the mass migration to work from home, there's big security holes. there's big opportunity to support those folks. And the end result is we did a survey in mid-May, sent it out, kind of blasted it out across the universe, very unscientific, right? Got about 6,500 results back, and it painted a pretty interesting picture of what now those people are faced with work from home. So we can dig into those details, but that itself, I think, is, as we unpack that, that's where we see these big MSP opportunities laying in wait.
So these results that you got back, the people who, listen, I don't want to get super political, but
Nope.
polls are often, sometimes the data behind them are skewed, right? So the 6,500 plus people who responded to your survey, they're business people, home people, business decision makers. I'm just trying to get a kind of feel for who responded to it.
Great question. Cross-section of all of the above. We didn't approach it from a scientific standpoint, so we weren't looking at representative samples or anything like that. So we recognize the inherent flaw in a survey that's not scientific, but the interesting part is we've seen similar surveys from Trend was out with one, Kaspersky's been out with one, even IBM has been out with one recently that backs up exactly what we found. So there is some consistency out there to the numbers we saw, which I think, again, just really solidifies the fact that there's some need here. And I'm not sure anybody fully understands how to best address it.
Okay. So why don't you give us, the important takeaways then from this, seems like numerical trend, right, across all these surveys. I think generally speaking, the MSPs understand they're going to have to, or have already, or in the middle of getting their hands dirty with, stuff they normally would say, nope, I'm not doing it. Specifically with home networking, specifically with executives working from home, how do you secure stuff, the shared computers with the, the home, education thing happening and about to restart again in the fall. So like we've talked a lot about all of these topics. So I'm curious to see where your data falls on top of that.
Yeah, let's get into the numbers. And then I definitely want to have a conversation around what you're talking about. I was just on a session prior to this where it was another one of these conversations about, yep, we realize this is an issue, but nobody is stepping forward with real answers about how to address this.
Yeah,
So I'd love to dive into that.
I think duct tape and bubble gum so far, as much
So
as I can
far,
get. But
you
go
got
ahead.
it.
Let's hear it.
Here are a couple of things to think about. Number one, of the 6,000 plus, 60% of those who said they were working from home are using their own personal devices. And that has, again, those other surveys I referenced, there's a real consistency to that. More than half of these people are plugging in from their own devices, which security professionals, any MSPs, MSSPs out there see that as a giant red flag. Heck, they were probably aware of it too. I've heard anecdotal stories about it was a rush to make this happen.
Sure.
I've heard stories about people packing up desktop computers from their office into their trunk and taking them home, and they've been plugging in
without telling the MSP or IT department. Let me double down on that.
Yeah, exactly. So that alone, I mean, we could set all the other numbers aside that we came up with, but the fact that 60% of these people are plugging in at home with their own personal device is pretty alarming. And underneath all of that, I think there are any number of issues. We had a panel discussion 2 weeks ago with a friend who's an MSSP here locally in Iowa. And he said, think about it this way, Corey. Security traditionally has been built around castle doctrine, right? You take everything that's valuable, you build up walls around it and protect it. He said, well, what happened in March was you had a big subset of people who basically took everything that was valuable and loaded it onto their kid's laptop and took it home and plugged it in.
You're not
And
wrong.
that's kind of cutting right to the chase, but that's what we're faced with right now. Is a lot of these people are working on personal devices, and that in itself, glaring red flags for everybody.
For sure. 60% though, I mean, that's higher than I thought. I thought sub 50, but the fact that we're above 50, 60, maybe even a little bit higher than that, if that's the case, that means that the majority of people don't have a device that was meant to be work for business use. So
oof. Exactly. And let's think about the economy and how that's going to turn. Is that going to change? Do you have companies that are now equipped to go out and purchase a bunch of laptops to replace these 60% that are relying on personal devices? I would guess we're going to have a lot of companies that say we don't have the budget for that. We're going to have to figure out a way to make this work with these personal devices. Whether it's ever going to be a perfect solution or not, I don't know. But I kind of doubt. I mean, that anybody's going to magically find the money to go, purchase a couple of hundred laptops.
It's that, or it's a pivot to virtual desktop.
Right.
Virtual
That's
server.
the other option. You got it. So that's one of the first things that jumps out. The next thing is, and this goes directly to the MSP opportunity. Fewer than 50%, less than 50% said they are getting any type of IT support from their employer. So they're on their personal devices, and fewer than 50% say they're getting any IT support from their employers. So these folks are out there flying blind.
Interesting. So we had a gentleman that's like, Mr. Co-managed IT, for lack of a better term. And he mentioned that there's a large uptick in internal IT that are understaffed or had headcount cut that are reaching out to people in the MSP space to augment, because they just don't have the resources to handle the influx that the level one requests coming through for their employees at home, right? Usually, you would think that internal IT, when they're, pre-COVID time, right, they have a trickling of issues that come through like any help desk. But I guess that flood that came through, where MSPs kind of satisfied that mountain that went up and then came back down, your results are telling me that the internal IT departments never got to it, never got through it, never dealt with it. They kind of just left it out there.
I think that's the case. I don't think it's universal, but I think there's definitely a gap here. And whether that IT staff is going to be able to step up and come up with a way to better support those folks at home, who knows? But I think it definitely presents the question, who's going to fill the gap? And is there anybody better equipped than an MSP to step in to either co-manage it or take it over? And are there solutions and bundles that are ready to go to provide for that? But again, a lot of people working on personal devices with no IT support at home is not a recipe for a good outcome here so far.
No, I don't think anyone disagrees.
Right.
I just don't think anyone knew the actual numbers and where the opportunity lied to pivot, right? So let's hear what you got next.
So here's the other one that stands out, and we can get into some of the granular stuff. But it was well north of 60 to 70% of these people are saying that they're not getting any additional cybersecurity awareness training while they're at home. So obviously we've got a subset that are saying they get no IT support at all. Maybe it's not a surprise that they're not getting any type of training beyond, let's hope they had some when they were in the office, right? But now they're at home, they're getting even less. And we know in some cases it's not even speculation anymore that these folks are going to be targeted at home. So if they're not getting any additional training on what to be looking for from a phishing standpoint or otherwise, again, I think it creates an opportunity to fill a gap there.
Yeah, cybersecurity training is a very interesting one, right? Like there's programs out there and there's, some vendors, I'm not trying to pick out on anyone, but there's several vendors in the space that help with this, kind of gap, right? That they're trying to fill into their stack. A lot of cybersecurity, also does the phishing simulation tests, right? To find out who's like, the guy that doesn't hover over his links and just, they got him. There's absolutely no question that all the security people that we've had on have said there's been a huge, whether it's state sponsored or just some dude in his basement, there's been a huge influx of targeting COVID scams, the IRS scams with the checks, and then even just Office 365, hey, it's a OneDrive link, and then all of a sudden it's actually a spoof. So it's very intriguing that it sounds like, again, nobody went back and said, oh, by the way, hey, the castle, you said back to castle doctrine, right? Oh, by the way, you're at home now. There is not enough protection. And now, by the way, we're also not giving you enough, education or reminders to not click on the bad thing, not go to the bad site, not click on the bad email link. So very interesting. Generally speaking, though, there's still a huge gap with businesses even doing any of that education normally, right?
Oh,
Like even coming
absolutely.
into 2020, that seemed to have been a big hole anyway.
No doubt about it. Last fall, I was out at a conference, and I won't name names or say where I was. Had a gentleman that came up after I presented and said, I just took over IT for a large corporation. We've got nearly 100,000 employees. Said one of the first things I did first week on the job was I decided to roll out a phishing simulation test to see just exactly what I was dealing with. He said he had 25,000 people click on the test. So, and again, everyone can do the math to figure out what that means for the organization of their size. But it speaks to the fact that the need for training's there. We obviously focus on endpoint security, and we believe we're a critical piece of the stack, but we're not naive enough to believe that training's not also necessary, that backup's not also necessary. And training, there's been a lot of talk about it, but the gap is still there. You're exactly right.
Yeah, I think a lot largely there's been a huge focus on it in the last 18 months in MSP land. And you would think the vendors that offer this service, specifically packaged for MSPs, would see a lot larger adoption, but there's still a long, like usually it's packaged with some sort of dark web monitoring or something like that. I don't know if you've seen that, but it seems like there's still hesitance on making that just part of the solution for some reason.
I think you're right. And here's one I'll throw at you, and I'd love to get your feedback on. One of the things I've found interesting is at the onset of the outbreak, right? We got a lot of requests from chambers of commerce all over the country, and I'm sure you probably did too. Hey, will you come in and present on best practices for these people working from home? And like any good citizen, right, we stepped up and we did it. And I made the list of 10 and I presented. But after doing about half of those, I found myself thinking, what percentage of people that are listening in can actually go implement anything I just suggested? I mean, from something as basic as changing a router password, right? I mean, all of this at home being built around Wi-Fi networks where the password in a lot of households is being shared with every neighborhood kid in 20 miles. So if we can at least help these people understand how to go secure that element of what they're logging in from there, or what their network is at home, I think that's the other side of training. It's not only the awareness piece, but also we are going to have to figure out how to go train these people to support themselves at home. If IT is not going to step up and do it, if the MSPs aren't going to be asked to do it, or hopefully they will, we're going to have to educate these folks about what to do beyond just what kind of emails to avoid and what not to click on. It's kind of operationally from beginning to end how to protect themselves at home.
I saw a funny on Facebook the other day where it was like one of those memes, and somebody unplugged their router, and the people across the street flipped out.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Exactly. I think there's a lot of that. And I think it's an interesting discussion of it. This was a topic that was on the session I was on previously. Is this a matter of people at home are not willing to do this? And there are, I've seen some articles out there suggesting that's partly the case. Or are they not able to do this stuff? Right.
Low hanging fruit, lowest common denominator, weakest chain in the link. I mean, we can say it 5 different ways, but yeah, if I'm just driving down the street and I'm logging into people's home routers, that's
right.
It's probably the easiest thing you can do, right?
Right. Exactly. So I think this is part of the challenge for MSPs that I'll throw out there is if your intent is to go after this gap, is to be able to go after it with a bundled solution that's going to include everything from cybersecurity awareness training to training, or even, I guess, rolling a truck and helping them actually go into the house and fix all this stuff up, making sure that you've got visibility to the endpoints, making sure whatever antivirus they're running is patched and up to date. There's a lot to it. And I think business owners, especially the SMB community, is going to be very open to an MSP that will walk in the door with a bundled solution that says, here's how I'm going to help you enable business continuity. I know you're worried about making payroll. I know your entire workforce is at home and there's no sign of them coming back to the office soon. Here's how we're going to make sure that we can keep you operational.
Hmm.
I think that's, who figures that out and figures out that ideal bundle and how that fits into a security stack. That's who's going to take advantage here.
I agree 100%. What other cool stats did you get from your survey?
This one's kind of disjointed from the other numbers we threw out there, but again, we looked at those that said that they were using personal devices. Mm-hmm. It was nearly 70% said their employer did nothing in terms of issuing any type of security software, any type of antivirus software for them to take home and run on their personal device. Now, maybe it's a gigantic leap to assume that would have happened. But again, you've got a lot of companies knowing that these people are plugging in with personal devices and not even taking a step to make sure that those devices are secure in even a real basic way. I mean, how many of these, this is the fascinating thing to get to at some point, is how many of these personal devices are running outdated security software that hasn't had signatures updated in how long, right?
Patches, all sorts of stuff. This reminds me of my college days. When I first went to, I'm a Philly guy. I went to Drexel University, and they were one of the first higher education, where you had to have a lab. Every person had to have their own computer, right? This was, and so when you logged into the dorm network, you had to run this scan, like that. You logged into a web page, it ran the scan on your computer, and they wouldn't shift you from the boxed network, right? The segregated network that you started on to the real internet, enabled network, unless you pass the test, right? And this is going back to their, 2000s here. It's very interesting that these basic checks aren't being done from a corporate level either, right? And I think that's, you think about that was a methodology back 20 years ago. It's very interesting now where it's like these things aren't even being done before they log into the shared intranet portals. Even if, they're logging into a virtual desktop, there's still things like keyloggers, right? There's still things, that can capture those, those logins. And so the idea that the home computer is, okay, even if it's in, not in perfect shape, it's probably a flawed thing, right?
I think it's definitely the case. And I think going into trying to research this and look into it further, my assumption was maybe this is exclusive to smaller companies that just had to rush into this and just have to get it done. I listened to a panel discussion last week that involved 3 IT directors for banks in the Midwest. And to a person on that discussion.
Can I pause you? Next time you're on that, can you ask them where's all the change?
I will.
Where are all the coins at? Why do I got to
Yeah, I just heard about this. I don't completely understand it, but I heard apparently there's a massive shortage on change, which
don't know why, but okay.
Most of it's under my front seat of my car, I think.
Yeah.
So
anyway, go ahead.
So to a person on this panel, and these are IT directors for pretty prominent banks, they talked about the fact that they were sending their employees home without corporate issued devices, and they're working on personal devices as well. So I went into this panel discussion kind of hoping that I was going to hear a different story from these guys versus what maybe the small and medium-sized business owner that was in a desperate time had to do. But these are guys you figure would have had this figured out, and everybody was going to have a corporate issued or company issued device to go home and plug into. And they were given real world examples of where that isn't the case, that their employees were at home.
Don't they have like FINRA, or they have compliances of some sort, financial ones, right? SOX.
You heard rumblings, right, about compliance issues were kind of maybe moved to the side a bit in some cases. I don't want to get into that because I don't know enough about it or what actually happened in those cases. But I think the rush left behind some pretty significant holes out there. And it's not just limited to small companies that had no other option.
I better double check my bank account balance.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
I didn't think about that, but if 3 CIOs are telling you they didn't have the answer, then That's a problem.
Well, they did follow up by saying that the board now gave them clearance to go ahead and go out and purchase new laptops for everybody. And well, great. How many companies have that luxury now, or have the money to do that? So I think that's going to continue to be an issue. I think the other thing, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this part of it, is as we attempt to fill this gap, who draws the line about supporting these personal devices at home? And if I'm an MSP that is troubleshooting on behalf of a customer, and that customer wants you as an MSP to troubleshoot for those employees at home, if those employees at home are using personal devices, is there a line that can't be crossed about just how far we've got privacy issues to unpack there?
Mm.
To me,
Well,
I think maybe go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, there's three different thoughts on this, and we had Brad Gross on earlier in the MSP Initiative series. He was on 2 sessions, and number one, a lot of people wrote into their MSAs, "Hey, I'm not touching the home stuff. It's not
Right.
supported. It's not covered, unless I'm throwing you a bone, right, just to help you out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which sometimes the CEO's home computer or whatever. But you get what I'm saying? Like, no, other than a very slim exception, the home devices were excluded from the MSA. So there was definitely a wrinkle where people started to say, all right, well, if I'm forced to deal with this for the long term, there's got to be some sort of financial component, right? Because there's 2 parts to this. There's a liability standpoint, and then there's a cost standpoint. On the cost standpoint, pain in the ass tax, if you would, right? But just, these machines are the ones that take the longest amount of time. They're, it's like the person calling in on a 10-year-old machine that's refused to upgrade, and all they call about is that their computer's slow. Like, how much can you do after a certain point, right? It just is what it is. But at the same token, to your point, like, the company has to have certain conversations around, hey, if you're going to use a home computer, what's company protected data versus personal data, because there's supposed to be a privacy barrier, to your point there. And then the other component is, and I'm sure time is the third angle here, some people probably didn't think that, like, there's this question, there's still the question mark, right? How long is this going to continue, right? So if somebody said, hey, it's a 90-day thing, maybe they skirt, right? Obviously we're past that. So now the question is, are we into this time next year? Is there another 6 months of this? Is there another year of this? So there's these 3 triangle points that we're all trying to, fill between. And I think part of the problem, Corey, is that the business decision makers of these companies, right? Like, hey, let's take aside the fact that I'm worried that my business is going to still be in business, because that's still really a concern, right? But putting that to the side for a second, these people aren't educated, I think, to a large degree to put these policies in place, to put these protections in place, both legally, both, to follow the laws, to protect their people, to protect them. So there is surely, you said there was an education gap on security. There's definitely an education gap from a business decision-making standpoint. They just don't know what they don't know.
It's definitely true. And here's a challenge that I came up against last week, and this speaks to that gap, I think, is we still have MSP partners that want to go out there and approach end customers and talk speeds and feeds. And one of the things that we've been advocating is that's not the conversation that these people want to have. There may be some that are very tech savvy and want to understand exactly how you're going to protect them. But the majority are worried about, again, hitting payroll. They're worried about business continuity. And they want to know that it's being taken care of, and that their employees that are sitting at home, logging in for the last 3 months, are going to be able to do that securely. So if you can approach them as an MSP and give them that confidence that that'll all happen, they don't really care how the sausage is made. They don't care what's a part of your security stack. And there may be exceptions, and maybe you'll tell me I'm wrong on that, George, but I found it fascinating that we still have that tendency to want to go out there and talk speeds and feeds and talk about how the sausage is made. I think we need to talk more kind of holistically.
Yeah, I think that the people, like, peer groups are great, by the way, because they kind of educate people on how to run their own businesses as an MSP. But to that point, there's definitely an absolute point to you saying they don't care how the sausage is made. But when the marketing gets broken down at the end of the day, like if you said, hey, we got this covered, it's part of this stack, it's included, and then when push comes to shove, it fell down and the marketing story just evaporated, that's when you see people bailing. That's when you see people looking for, they cut their provider, they move to another one, right? So there's definitely a fine line between, hey, don't get too granular, but also making sure that you're not over-promising, under-delivering too, because that will come back and slap you in the face.
No, it's a great point. It's an absolutely great point. So I think, man, you keep bundling all this together, and I still am a firm believer that this means there's opportunity. If you listen to the Jay McBains of the world or some of the forecasts, it's ugly. I mean, they're talking about maybe mid next year, things coming back around. I think the one thing that Jay and Forrester say is that will potentially be flat are managed services, and he points to security. So I say take that and double down on the fact that the work from home gap is there. That is the place to fill right now. And it's a challenge.
So to Jay's point, I have not talked to Jay yet, and it might be interesting to try and get him on. But I did see something Jay put out there, like literally today or yesterday online, saying that it's going to be like a 17% decrease in either revenues or just straight up new business or existing business fallout. All of that combines a 17% drop from, not 2019 going into 2020, going into 2021, right? So that line's pointing down according to Jay.
I believe so. Yeah. And he talked about the recovery, and I apologize to Jay if I get this wrong. He talks about the recovery being more U-shaped than it is going to be V-shaped. And one of the things I hoped he would do when we talked was talk about, well, give us some silver lining here. What do you think under all of this could help sustain some MSPs that want to hang in there? And he did. He pointed to security as maybe being one of those things that will be flat. There'll still be a dip, but it's not going to be the radical dip of 17% overall.
That number scares me because if you look at best-in-class MSPs, right? They say best-in-class MSPs. And again, I'm going to, hopefully quote properly, right? Paul Dipple, Service Leadership. Everybody's probably heard of him. So he says best-in-class MSPs are doing 20% to the bottom line and above. If you can lose 17%, it trickles down to that number. That's a very small margin of error there to stay okay.
Right. Well, and I think we've had a lot of conversations with partners lately, and part of what I've heard, and this is from both existing partners and new, is that they're also taking the time to kind of tighten their own belts and figure out, are we as efficient as we can possibly be to survive this?
For sure.
And we've straight up had the conversation about, hey, we like your approach to security. We like what you're doing. And it seems to be an easy lift and it's more economical. There are others out there that are great solutions, but it takes a lot of resources. It takes a lot of time. And it costs more, quite frankly. So if you can provide me, what I need, especially something that services this work from home market better, or installs on a personal device and gives me some visibility there, it seems like day by day we hear from partners that want to tighten their belts and ride this thing out, and they think there's a more efficient way to do it than what they're currently doing. So I hope that is happening, because I think it'll allow many to weather the storm that unfortunately we're going to lose a lot along the way. And I think we all realize that, but there's also some that are going to be smart about it too.
For sure. What else did you have in your survey? Anything good?
Those are the big highlights. Our plan is to do a follow-up and really try to drill down and look at this at a more granular level and do some breakout by verticals, things like that. So I was just encouraged to see that there were other surveys that actually backed this up. And I will be very interested to see how this evolves over time. Do we see some improvement? Do we see people getting their hands on more company issued devices, things like that?
So let's pivot for a second then, since we got the main 3 or 4 things out of your survey. And listen, we've talked about security a lot. I don't want to, go too far into the weeds, but there's a lot of argument right now on what's better. I mean, listen, I think universally everybody agrees on a layered security approach, right? There's no one perfect answer there. But there's a lot of questions around whether the SOC, SIEM, security as a service that used to be so expensive, it wasn't even in the conversation, that's now come down to earth, versus endpoint security, which, listen, for the guys that have been in the business, I've been here for a while, Symantec was in the beginning, right? And then, like, over time, there's all these different, security vendors came down, right? And you got like the ESETs and the Vipers and the Kasperskys, to your point, you mentioned them earlier. Like, where do these two theories kind of intersect, or is any one lean to the left or to the right? I'm curious. I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, where is the fine line here?
Again, thinking from an opportunity perspective, and that's what we're always trying to do on behalf of our partners, right? I mean, obviously, we're heavily invested in the endpoint side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a place for everything else at the table and part of the stack? No doubt about it. Absolutely. But I think there's also the recognition that maybe the endpoint side of things has been overlooked to some degree. And maybe some of the basic blocking and tackling that's out there has been overlooked. I mean, the foundation of our endpoint product is all based on zero trust, default deny, right? If something attempts to execute on a system that we've got an agent down on and we don't recognize it as a known good, we're going to block it from executing. If you look at NIST, if you look at the forthcoming CMMC stuff, which that's a separate conversation for MSPs should be having. I mean, all of these standards now mention this as something that should be included as part of any really solid security approach. And most people have avoided it because it seems like a giant pain, right? They don't want the obligation of having to deploy it or manage it on a go forward basis. So my sense is there are a lot of moving parts out there. There's no doubt about it. Everyone's going to say they've got the answer. My suggestion is it's still going to be a layered approach, but you're going to see more and more of a focus at the endpoint level because it has been ignored. And there is some real value there in some of the new products that are able to automate and streamline some of the approaches that were kind of dismissed in the past because they seemed like too heavy a lift. So that's where our focus is.
Let me pick one thing out of what you just said. So there's definitely an ongoing conversation in many groups around the MSP channel or IT channel, that is, around cybersecurity frameworks, right? And NIST and CMMC, but there's been a lot of, kind of leaning to CMMC. So for people who don't understand what that is, could you maybe give a layman's term of what that is? And then I want to talk to you a little bit about, like, for example, for the people who are talking about CMMC as the defining framework that we should be following regardless, they're saying forget 1, 2, they're saying 3, 4, like they're looking at the higher end as the standard because the beginning part of CMMC is just barely, like you don't even have the building blocks to call yourself an MSP kind of thing. So go ahead. Let's take your opinion on that.
And I'll confess, I'm going to give you the one layer above layman's version of this because that's where I'm at. We've got a federal division that's spending a heck of a lot of time on it right now. And we're going to be hosting a session with Katie Arrington, who is basically responsible for CMMC.
Oh, when's that? And where can people watch it? Because you're going to want to go to that.
We have yet to book it, but she has made a commitment that she's going to appear with us and talk about it in detail. So here's what I know about CMMC. It's Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And this was more or less the standard that DoD, Department of Defense suppliers would have to meet from a cybersecurity perspective if they wanted to do business with the Department of Defense. And I believe, we're at 5 layers? Is there 6 layers?
I think there's 5 right now, yeah.
A lot of the talk you're hearing is, if you're not already at 1 and 2, what have you been doing? To your point, right? It's the basics. 3, 4, and 5 is really where you need to be, and that's where most people are going to be aiming. Here's the opportunity, and I've used the word a lot, but this is what I'm looking for my partners. I find it interesting that CMMC is not only going to be this framework or this guide for that federal space, but we've even had conversations with organizations that are going to use CMMC as a framework to introduce cybersecurity best practice into the SMB space.
Mm.
And there's even an initiative around working with the Small Business Administration around trying to drive it that way. So all of a sudden, if you think about MSPs and all of your SMB customers or potential customers, now you're going to have this CMMC framework that, hey, if it's good enough for the federal government and what they're doing, it sure should be good enough for you as a small business owner as well. And here's how I can get you to these levels. Maybe we can get you to 3. We should already have you at 1 or 2, but here's how we can take some steps above and beyond. Now, our product happens to fit into those layers very well, so we're going to champion it all day long. But I think there's value in these frameworks and guidance beyond just that federal space, at least.
No, fair enough. Yeah. So if anybody hasn't had a chance or hasn't heard of it, Google it. There's a lot of information out there. It's like a pyramid, right? Where you're trying to get to the top. I hadn't heard of it until this year, right? When COVID hit, really, because I wasn't necessarily dealing on anything I'm working on the federal government space. But it's very interesting to hear where existing MSPs who have already stumbled into suppliers that feed the federal government from a defense standpoint got sucked into this framework, right? So this is like remember when Home Depot, the HVAC contractors login got hacked, and then all of a sudden all of Home Depot's system got put online, and credit cards and whatever. So basically it's not, hey, you shouldn't have to worry about this if you're not dealing with the federal government. It's if you're dealing with a company that is supplying them, you're going to get sucked into it anyway. And that's why people, number one, were like, well, we should pay attention to this. Number two is, hey, there's no one standard, right? The standard kind of like happens over time with what people adopt, but this is very clear, right? There's not a lot of ambiguity in what these phases are and what each level means and how to kind of comply. So yeah, very interesting topic for sure. So
I think, to your point about I think this requires some momentum. I think it's going to take some time, but if it keeps moving the way I feel like it's going to move, I think we'll have MSPs. You're going to hear about it from your customers. Your customers might be asking. Maybe their insurance provider, right, wants to know where they fall on the CMMC spectrum at some point. So hopefully, again, this is going to be something that the customers are leading with, and MSPs are just able to fulfill.
No, very interesting. And it'd be interesting to see if it's affordable for small business to comply. But I got to think, and this has been discussed in many groups, but I'm just going to reiterate it here. I believe the insurance industry is probably one that's going to force the agenda, because the cybersecurity, whoever's re-upped on their cybersecurity questions recently, it's not a half-page document anymore, guys, or a one-page document. It's getting really granular, right? Because these payouts are starting to increase in terms of what's being covered.
No doubt.
It's like, so the insurance industry, number one. And then, like they have their own team of people, right? Like if you are covered with cyber liability insurance, which a lot of people are, when there's an issue, you got to pick up the phone and call them first, right? To get this process started right away. And they got a whole team of people and a list of vendors behind them, right? So there is a little bit of an industry popping up there on that end, right? With like ransomware negotiators and all sorts of crazy stuff that I never heard of until COVID, by the way. Because it's just popping up more and more. But I think the other industry there's certain other industries that are already forcing the agenda. Banking, which I was shocking to hear what you said earlier. So financial services, right? And medical, right? Everybody's heard of HIPAA compliance. They can argue how effective it is and, what have you, but that's definitely out there. But it'd be very interesting to see. I feel like the credit card processing industry is pretty deep down this road because they're getting hit on the fraud stuff too, right?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think it's just a matter of time before each vertical feels whatever pain threshold, right, they cross where this stuff has to be addressed. And yeah, I think you're spot on. I think anything financial there, super sensitive.
So let's zoom in real quick into the layered services just to make sure maybe we're all talking the same thing. Mm-hmm. There's like 4 or 5 things that I think are in this layer. I mean, obviously, firewall UTM's been around for some time. I don't think putting in a Linksys router from Best Buy is the replacement. You should have something there. Now, I'm going to put in here some sort of antivirus, anti-malware. Sometimes they're separate products, right? That seems to be, 1A, 1B, or 2A, 2B. 3 is, and it seems to be a lot around compliances, encryption at the device level, right? Like disk encryption, whole disk encryption. And then the other one that comes to mind is some sort of DNS filtering, protection, spoofing, right? And spam filtering, click, filtering, right, from your emails. That's number 5. I call that the foundational 5 from a layering standpoint, right? Now you want to add education, right? Which is like, hey, I want to, make sure you understand what you're doing. I want to do some fish testing with you, that kind of stuff. I'll put that as number 6. What am I missing from that stat? Is there more that should be out there?
I think you've hit it. I think the missing component, and again, I'm thinking about it from a standpoint of taking this out and presenting this to a business owner of here.
Multi-factor authentication. Forgot.
There you go. Multi-factor. Absolutely. Definitely necessary. I'm thinking about it from a perspective of going out to a business owner to say, here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to help take care of all of this, is to be able to map out from almost a policy standpoint or give suggestions about how this is all going to work. And it goes back to our discussion about how does the help desk support 50 employees that are home that are all plugging in on their kids' laptops, and what can they look at? What can they not look at? What can they touch? What can they not touch? I think a lot of small and medium-sized business owners have no idea where to even start.
I agree.
So if all this can be tied up in a nice, neat bow, and from what you mentioned all the way through multi-factor, and then combine it with Mr. Business Owner or Mrs. Business Owner, here's the policies that we're going to have you put in place from an HR standpoint in combination with what we're doing, then we're going to ensure business continuity. Then you're not going to have to worry about anything. But all of this needs to be done in cooperation with you and all of your employees, and done at once. It can't be hit or miss.
So this falls in line with Mauricio, who actually chatted in. It's perfect timing. So how do you, what ammunition do you bring to the table? How do you convince, encourage, position upper management to provide the funding so that the resources can be installed to train the staff on security? Like, what is what are the top, 1 or 2 things they can, like, literally bust through the door, Kramer edition, into the owner's office and say, we need to do this?
I'm a big advocate for, you can't sell on fear, but you can sell on risk, and you can sell on what genuine risk is. A lot of these people are seeing the headlines. They're seeing the ransomware headlines, or they've heard about somebody down the street that got hit. But I think it's bringing that awareness to the table of here is what is on the line. And I'm not doing this to scare you. I'm not doing this to cause undue fear, but this is the real risk based on what I've evaluated with your organization. Now I've got in place here exactly what we're going to need to do to address this. But we're going to have to do it comprehensively. You can't just do this piecemeal. And if you can't take this and can't take it as a whole, I can't have you as a customer. But this is the reality. There are small businesses being hit by ransomware every day that are being forced to shut down. Everybody's been using that line, but it's real and it's actually happening. And there's no sign that any of these ransomware threats are going anywhere, right? As long as there's money to be made, this stuff is going to continue. There's no doubt about it. And the attack vector the surface is much bigger now because of the work from home. So I think it's a matter of educating these folks as you walk in the door, and being super honest with them and trying to understand what they're trying to accomplish. I think the other thing Jay at Forrester is a big advocate for right now is getting to know what your customers' plans are going forward. Do they intend to maintain a headquarters? Are they going to shut the headquarters down and go 100% virtual? Mm-hmm. Really being able to understand that, and then customize or give them the solution that's going to enable that. Unfortunately, too many partners are out there having generic conversations without really understanding what the intent of their customer is, or what their future is, given the uncertainty right now.
Let me ask another question on this topic, right? So Mauricio came and said, well, what ammunition do I have to go in and convince, ownership management to spend money? We talked about now 7, 8 things, right? we counted them. We can go over them again if you want, right? We talked about UTM, endpoint protection, malware, DNS, multi-factor, encryption, training, staff HR policies, and I'm missing one, but there's another one in there. There's a lot of products across the space that cover all of these segments, and they're all at different price points. Some are enterprise products trying to come down. Some are other products trying to come up, whatever it is. What is the genuine ballpark price point to cover these things? Like, it's all over the map, from my opinion. Is it $20 a user? Is it $100 a user? Is it $50 a business? Is it $1,500 a business? Like, how do you qualify or quantify these items here?
It's a great question. And you know what? It's probably smarter people than me that are going to answer. You know, the Gary Pikas of the world have a pretty solid formula about where you should be as you're putting this stack together, and where it needs to be from a margin perspective. I will proudly say that as a piece of that, you know, our pricing right now per endpoint starts south of $1 per endpoint per month. So to that end, we try to be an easy part of that solution that means high value, high margin. Unfortunately, I think there are a lot of products out there that don't fit that category. They cost a heck of a lot, and they require a heck of a lot in terms of resource as well. So this goes back to these conversations we're having with partners that I think are reevaluating, man, what am I paying for and what am I getting? And I have 5 fewer employees now because I'm just trying to survive as a business owner as well. What is more efficient, and what can I sustain and still deliver a level of service that my customers expect? So, you know, how to arrive at that number, I would defer to really, really smart people like Gary Pika, who's the godfather of MSPs is what I was told.
I don't know about the guy. I don't know if I give him that name, but okay, fine. He's from Philly too, so he can. That's okay. We're both Philly guys.
There you go.
I'll send him a cheesesteak if he's. But I hear you. He's been around for a while, and he obviously consults with a lot of MSPs around the world. So it just seems like that number is all over the map, and I think that's part of the challenge with MSPs trying to sell security-focused solutions, because like every business has a threshold of what, like, you know, they say the general thought is every business should take 1% of their gross revenue annually should be towards technology. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's like the starting point, right? 1%. So if you're $1 million business, do the math, take 1%, you know, that should be at the starting point for technology, not less. You know, obviously as it grows, that number grows with it. Security obviously has added probably, you know, some additional juice to that percentage, right? And, you know, because now what you do is you rope in all the security services, which also fall into insurance, which also falls into, you know, cloud and backup and all that other stuff falls into it. So it'd be very interesting to see over the next, let's call it January 1, 2022, where we went from now until then and where that math changed. Because I do think a lot of people are struggling to, you know, to Mauricio's point, validate what it is. I mean, I guess it's worth going and taking every news segment that's been put out on this for the last 6, 8, 12 months and say, here it is. If you don't believe me, you know, but I think that there's a real conversation on what the threshold is where somebody will say, hey, you know what? That makes sense. Just do it, versus, you know, the argument of, I just don't find value. So I'm very, very curious to see as we move forward where that demarcation point is.
I think there are a lot of unknowns. I mean, to that end, I think there are a lot of unknowns about the economy. I don't think we completely understand the impact we're gonna feel. I think the next 2 months will tell us a lot. But yeah, it will be interesting to see exactly what the market can sustain and what it does for pricing. So
100%. Corey, where do people find PC Matic, yourself, your team? How do they get involved? And also, unless you're going to send it to me and I can send it out, where do they find that soon to be posted panel with the CMMC people on the government side?
Sure. So all the information about our MSP platform and our partner program is pcmatic.com/MSP. So pcmatic.com/MSP. You can email me directly. It's Corey, Corey, at pcmatic.com. We're on all the social platforms. I'm a big LinkedIn guy, so it's easy to find me out there on LinkedIn. We've also got a PC Matic corporate page out there. We're on Twitter. It's at PC Matics, our handle. Anything we're going to do from an online session standpoint, promotion standpoint, it's all out there, including the CMMC session. I know we're still trying to firm up a date on it. I think it's going to be a really interesting dive with someone who's directly responsible for the program. And then I think it's up to us in the community to unpack what it means for MSPs and the channel. The framework's going to be there, and then we can build a discussion around that. So that's our intention, is to really organize the session that way. It might even break into one or two. And then we do weekly, sometimes even bi-weekly sessions where we bring in a lot of our friends in the security space. We're talking to people in the channel. We're talking to friends in the sales and marketing space as well. We continue to try to share all that with our partner community. They've asked for it year over year in every survey we do. This year, since there's no trade shows, hey, everybody's got time to actually follow through and produce the content now. So
For sure. We're all just waiting for trade show. No, I'm just
yeah,
to come back
someday.
One day. Well, Corey, I appreciate you for coming on. Everyone, thanks for watching. Again, this is recorded. The session will be posted online very shortly thereafter. So if you want to go back, rewind, pick apart a couple of things we talked about, feel free to do so. We'll watch out for Corey's announcement on this soon to be upcoming session with CMMC people. I think that'll be really interesting to follow up with. And again, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 o'clock Eastern, join us back here. And we're continuing our series at the MSP Initiative. Thanks for watching, everyone. And thanks for coming, Corey.
Thanks, George.
Have a good one.